Sure. So, yeah, I was asked to join this panel, this very honorable panel, as a business representative. Well, apparently, we are running some cloud infrastructure. It's pretty big. We now moved to the US, and we have a pretty huge system to track 300 million users, and we process today 3 billion events per day, which is quite big. And as a business, I sometimes realize that there are actually a lot of concerns that I really start seeing after understanding and comprehending what this, say, cloud infrastructure and moving into cloud means in terms of unprecedented amount of data and vulnerability that comes with just collecting the data. So what I decided after joining this panel is that we're probably very interested to highlight as a citizen, as a small European country citizen, a couple of areas which I thought would be great for discussing in this panel and given the representatives. So what I really wanted to touch in this discussion is understanding, safety, and transparency. Understanding in a way, sometimes as a citizen, I become very concerned. Does anyone at all understand what are the consequences of really collecting all those data, storing the data, having the data available? Just to share you some perspectives, a couple months ago I was shocked to realize that in the United States, as much as 25% of all divorces, 25% of all divorces are due to just Facebook. So they used to say what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Now they say what happens in Vegas stays on Facebook. And when I realized, well, probably 25% is such a huge number that we cannot speak that this is like random events. We're talking about the technology, specifically Facebook technology, specifically being able to collect the data, share the data, really starts to conflict with the very basics of humankind, like the ethical values, like the morality. So, apparently there is a huge incentive for business. When I said we're collecting 3 billion events a day, there is a huge incentive for business to collect the data. Apparently, we can optimize our business. I can know precisely to tell every person that we collect the data on what application he's using, where he's using, when he's using, how long he's using, who's he chatting with, who our friends are, etc., etc., etc. So there's a massive incentive for both the government and the business to collect the data, but do we really understand what happens, what the consequences are? Looking at the industries like an automobile industry, it took years until before the car was available and until we really found out the safety regulations. We invented the street lights because before that it was basically anarchy. So, so one of the points I'd really like to address at this panel is, if businesses really have a massive incentive to collect the data, if governments do, does anyone discuss at all what the consequences are? And if yes, how it's done? What's the philosophical component of actually all those technologies that we're using? And second is apparently safety. Well, apparently if you follow the news, you know that one of the greatest inventions of our time is the iPhone, and the latest version of iPhone can read your fingerprints, right? So half of the common users that I talk to say, well, I'm really concerned. That means, what if Apple just, accidentally loses those fingerprints and some criminal just, puts my fingerprints on the scene of crime? I am concerned because, every time I touch the little button, I have no clue what's going to happen to my fingerprints. So, so what's happening to this data? Apparently, when you read stories that corporations like Sony, PlayStation lose hundreds of millions of credit card records, that moment you understand, well, there's no such thing as a guaranteed safety. When you follow the latest trends in the industry, you realize that Google are starting to collect your DNA data. There are millions of records at Google somewhere. Again, I have no clue what's happening there. But actually know DNA for a lot of people, and people are submitting their DNA because Google is promising actually a lot of good things to do with the data. For example, they can track DNA and potentially spot DNA diseases and then tell you what potentially you're exposed to. So, but again, who's regulating the safety of those things? We're collecting massive amounts of data. And for example, in Lithuania, there is this data protection, privacy protection law that says, my personal tax identification number is subject to a ton of regulations, ton of safety procedures, but my DNA, to me, it's more valuable than my taxpayer number, can be read by companies like Google. And my fingerprint can be exposed to anybody, who just hacks into an iPhone system. So that is a real concern. Who watches the watchers? Who sets the rules? Finally, it's the transparency. Apparently, if you talk to average citizens, there is a massive concern that there is everybody collecting the data about anything and everything. There are rumors that governments are forcing companies like Facebook or Google to submit the data, to create backdoors in the phones, and when you travel, when you talk, no longer feel safe. And again, as a citizen, this is a big concern, because as a citizen, one of the biggest promises of government is my safety, my protection, because this is my basic need as a humankind. As you know, according to Maslow's pyramid, necessity for feeling safe is one of the very basic human necessities. Otherwise, a human being cannot be happy. So those are the issues. Again, those are the concerns, and those are various understanding what does the technology mean. Safety, how do we make sure that everything we collect is really safe, and then transparency, making sure that everybody understands the procedures. Every time you submit to Google, that Google can send certain information to government and how it's done. Just understanding. So these are the areas I'd like to address. Thank you.